Well, good evening, book lovers. Welcome to another episode of Cath-Lit Live. I am your host, Amy Cattapan. You can find me everywhere on social media under my pen name, AJ Cattapan. As always, at Cath-Lit Live, we're going to be talking with an author who's got a new book that has just released. And our show is sponsored by the Hello Prayer app. If you haven't checked it out, I believe right now, if you use my link, hello.app/Cath-Lit Live, you get 3 months, not the usual 30-day trial, but 3 months, I believe, of the premium trial. That means you get all the content. Hello has content that is free all the time, but then they have their premium content that people usually have to pay for. It's not a lot. It's very reasonably priced prayer app. But if you want to check it out for first, before you decide whether or not you want to actually pay for it, and again, it's like a cup of coffee a month is what you're paying. But check out hello.app/Cath-Lit Live. So much great new content. They just keep adding things all the time. Special gospel reflections read by TV Jesus himself, Jonathan Rumi from The Chosen, and reflections by Jeff Cavins, Father Mike Schmidt's content, Bishop Barron content, you name it. All sorts of great prayer leaders on there. So check out the Hello Prayer app. Well, tonight I have a new guest, someone I have not had on the show before. Her name is Katy Carl. Katy is the author of As Earth Without Water, which just released from Wise Blood Books, and of Praying the Great O Antiphons, My Soul Magnifies the Lord. She is also editor-in-chief of Dappled Things magazine. So please help me welcome to the show, Katy Carl. Hello, Katy.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you can be here to talk with us about your new book. So the book is As Earth Without Water. And when did it release? I know it was very recently, right?
Right. This was earlier this fall, so September 2021.
Awesome. Okay. And what is the book about? Tell us your little 30-second elevator pitch.
Sure. As Earth Without Water centers on the experiences of two contemporary artists and former lovers, both of whom have pressed pause on their creative practice in favor of other competing goods in their lives. After years apart, they meet again at the monastery where one of them, now known as Brother Thomas Augustine, has suffered a traumatizing act of abuse that is forcing him to rethink everything he thought he knew about trust, memory, belief, healing, and forgiveness.
All right. Okay. So I heard that there's visual artists as the main characters and life at a monastery. Are these things you're familiar with or things you had to learn about yourself as, or like research as sometimes we have to do as novelists?
So I did a fair bit of research. So aside from reading lots of nonfiction books as well as novels about both topics, and there's a short list of those resources for further reading in the back of my own book, I also spent significant time visiting art galleries as well as the types of Catholic monastic and contemplative settings that are open to pretty much everyone. I also read the rules of a variety of religious orders, particularly contemplative orders, so that I could get a sense of the framework in which at least some of the characters would be living. And I relied heavily on Thomas Merton's writing for certain passages. So the setting of Our Lady of the Pines Monastery is a nod to that cultural indebtedness, but Our Lady of the Pines is not intended to be a direct mimesis of Gethsemane, which I've never visited, and have a lot of respect for, for that cultural presence, right? Although again, the name seems to have stuck in my mind, evoking the first sorrowful mystery of the Rosary. It's no accident at all that a central scene in the novel, the difficult confession that Thomas Augustine has to make, takes place in and takes its form as an agony in a garden, precisely. So that conversation is a kind of preparation for the kind of small c crucifixion of the will, really, for him in the novel. And in the crucifixion in that case is having to tell his story of having been abused to people he believes won't understand or maybe won't have compassion for his experience.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing too, that you bring up abuse, which obviously has been plaguing the church for a long time. Why bring that into a story? Why bring in an incident of violence abuse in this church context?
Sure. First, I want to say quite simply that I simply love the people who make up the Catholic Church. I also love the Catholic Church itself and what it authentically teaches. I think this church offers us our way to Christ, and that Christ has extraordinary power in human lives to heal and save. And yet, abused by those who should have represented Christ but did not, in fact, represent him in their actions, can do tremendous harm to people's ability to sustain belief and to access healing. And so, to talk a little bit about the ways that these popular narratives get built up that can maybe stand in between people and their ability to understand what goes on. Maybe, even if you haven't experienced, an abuse situation yourself, maybe you know someone who has, or maybe just the weight of the knowledge is so heavy and you feel a responsibility toward those who've suffered, but at the same time, you don't know what you can do to help. And to speak to this level of the crisis, I have to say a little bit about the differences between what journalism can do, which again, I have a lot of respect for, and what literary fiction can do, which is my own the art that I practice. In any era where both genres exist in any meaningful way, both tend to tell the same kinds of stories about serious events in both private and public life, but journalism and literary fiction have divergent emphasis. I say this as someone who studied journalism, and I gave serious thought at one point to entering that field. But at a certain point in my studies, I realized that common formats of news reportage, even when they're done really well, can sometimes feel reductive to people. And even as to someone who has suffered, may even feel depersonalizing,
Mm.
because of time and space constraints, and it's perfectly understandable. Mainstream formats are limited to the bare bones of what happened. The story comes forward as it should, but the person who, especially someone who's most vulnerable, tends to disappear in that kind of story. Because what journalism does best, and it's a really important function, is to draw attention to harm and to wrong, ideally with an eye to seeing that something is done to make things right. We know that that process, when it happens at all, can be agonizingly slow. And while we wait for the arc of the universe to bend toward justice, it might feel safer for many victims or survivors to have, to remain or retain some sense of anonymity, because having such a sensitive story out in the world might feel like a radical invasion of privacy. Again, now I myself have not experienced anything like this directly, but as someone who tells stories, I recognize that there remains an unmet need for people to be able to tell their stories. And I think this is something that literary fiction can do best of all. Two things literary fiction does particularly well are to draw out the individuality and the unique, unrepeatable character of a human person, and to evoke compassion and pity for the person where appropriate. And I think if this novel makes it easier for even one person, like Brother Thomas Augustine, to process their own story in a way that brings them a step closer to healing, that it will have done its work in the world. But I hope that it brings that to many more readers if possible.
Yeah, that actually ties in a lot with what my dissertation was about, which was a different
Oh,
topic, not abuse, but it was about engendering empathy for immigrants in middle grade
okay.
readers through culturally relevant young adult literature. So again, that same idea of using fiction to humanize, right? You had mentioned the dehumanizing of people, and sometimes when you're actually reading about made up characters, it actually makes the people you meet in real life who've had similar situations somehow more human, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think even when you're dealing with fictional characters, I think, it's like Marianne Moore says about imaginary gardens with real creatures in them. These are still reflective of souls, right? Reflective of
Yeah.
real human situations. And I think we do well to approach that with respect.
I
Yeah.
love that quote. I'm gonna write that one down about the imaginary gardens with real creatures. All right, you mentioned literary fiction. So one more question for you along those lines. What are some of your literary influences then? Are there literary fiction authors who are like your heroes that you're emulating, or how have you been influenced?
Oh boy, how much time do we have left? Um,
Should we
I,
pick the top three?
Sure. I have a long list here, and I read and write as I do because I love both the sound of characteristically American novelistic voices as well as the broader tradition of the Catholic novel found in both America and Europe. So not only O'Connor, Faulkner, Warren, but also Francois Mauriac, Leon Blois, Sigrid Undset, Alice Thomas Ellis, Carolyn Gordon, Evelyn Waugh, Henry James, Willa Cather, Marilyn Robinson, David Foster Wallace, Christopher Bayhead. Even this list is way too short. And even for dedicated readers like your listeners, Amy, we all have busy lives. We all struggle to find time for longer and deeper novels. I make this my life's work, and I still struggle to find time, but I think that's all the more reason we need to insist on the value of that time. Our era makes such radical, unprecedented demands on people's attention as a sort of commodity, when what we all need most is a way to cultivate attention as a form of love. And I think literature at its best can help us do that. So that's what I want to advocate for. And I want to say thank you to you for what you do, because I think it helps more people do that.
Thank you so much. So where can people find you, Katy, if they want to learn more about you and your books? Where should they head?
I have a website which I'll drop into the show notes, or drop into chat, so you can put it in the show notes if that's okay.
Sure, I will. Yeah, and I will put it when it goes up on YouTube with the edited version. I'll make sure it's on the screen too, so it'll be here.
And then if you go to wisebloodbooks.com, that's where you can order my book. It's also available on Amazon, and if you love it and you leave a review, I'd be very grateful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Katy, and telling us about your book.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye, Katy. I'll talk to you. All right. So thanks to Katy again for coming on Cath-Lit Live. If you are a fan of literary fiction, go ahead and check out her work. Like I said, I will be leaving her information in the show notes on YouTube. On Facebook, we can put it in the comments. If you're watching this on IGTV later, you might want to just head on over to wisebloodbooks.com and check out her book there. All right, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and comment. That helps to get the word about these books out. Feel free to share this on social media as well. Until next time, everybody, happy reading.